Meanwhile, in the Middle East, dozens of active reservists in Israel's top special forces unit threatened not to show up for workdays after the country's parliament passed the first bill of a controversial judicial overhaul. Trisha Molina has the details.
Nearly 170 active reservists in Israel's top special forces unit said they will no longer volunteer for service as protests over the government's plan to overhaul the country's judiciary rippled within the Israeli society and the military. Letters signed by thousands of reservists over the last 7 months have up to now mostly remained threats. But this week, the situation could possibly take a different turn after 161 Air Force personnel announced they will stop their service once the legislative changes will push through. As the crisis deepens, the Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi reminded the protesting reservists of the great responsibility assigned to the military, no other than protecting the state of Israel and its civilians.
אתמול היה יום של שיא בעוצמות המחלוקת בחברה הישראלית. בתוך הטלטלה הזו, על צה"ל מוטלת אחריות גדולה להגן על מדינת ישראל ועל אזרחיה. ימי מחלוקת ומשבר דורשים להדגיש את המשותף והמאחד. משימת ההגנה על המדינה היא המחויבות העמוקה שלנו.
A report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS, previously ranked the Israel Defense Forces as the best equipped, best trained, and most capable in the region, while the 2023 Military Strength Ranking, released by Global Firepower, placed Israel among the top 20 nations based on current available firepower. Despite massive protests, the Israeli parliament, known as the Knesset, passed the first bill of the controversial measure last week. Under the so-called reasonableness bill, the measure removes the court's power to veto government decisions based on them being unreasonable, to which opponents argue will severely undermine the country's democracy. The next step of the judicial reform is due to be voted on in the parliament as early as autumn. Reporting for Newsline World, this has been Trisha Molina, SMNI News.
Turkey urged Sweden to take concrete steps to prevent the burning of the Quran after several protests which involved desecration of the holy book in Stockholm and Copenhagen enraged the Muslim world. Loren Santos has the details.
In a recent phone call, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan told his Swedish counterpart Tobias Billström that the desecration of the holy book sacred to the Muslims under the guise of freedom of expression was unacceptable. Fidan also strongly condemned the surge in attacks surrounding Quran and said Turkey is in serious discussions with Muslim countries and with nations allowing such incidents to happen. Both foreign ministers also discussed Sweden's membership application, set to be discussed in the Turkish parliament when it reopens in October. In a recent press conference, Fidan acknowledged the steps taken by Stockholm to address Turkey's security concerns, but said the Nordic countries still needs to take further steps. To recall, the Turkish foreign minister earlier this month said that the failure of the Swedish authorities to prevent Quran burning protests in their country is raising security concerns and makes the Nordic countries' credentials for NATO membership questionable, as it represents an image of a country that brings problems to the alliance instead of more power. In response to the dilemma, the Swedish government vowed to review whether it could change Sweden's Public Order Act to give police the possibility to stop demonstrations that will threaten security in the Nordic country. Reporting, this has been Loren Santos, SMNI News.
A week after the Israeli government passed the controversial judicial reform bill, leader of the opposition Yair Lapid demanded the legislation be frozen for 18 months or until 2025 as a precondition to resume negotiations with the coalition. But as Lapid clarified, this would require a 2/3 majority. Monday last week, the bill passed its third and final reading with 64 votes in favor and 0 against, following 30 long hours of debate in the Knesset. Under the reasonableness bill, the review of government decisions would be limited. The Yesh Atid party leader announced that they will appeal to the Supreme Court the law recently passed by the government. Wednesday last week, Israel's highest court said it would review legal challenges to a divisive new law that weakens its power. Civil society groups also filed petitions asking the Supreme Court to strike down the said recently enacted law. Protesters took to the streets for the 30th consecutive week, demonstrations to oppose the controversial bill. Lapid also slammed the Netanyahu government and said, this is the most serious crisis we have ever faced, and it was not caused by our enemies, but by an extremist and radical government. Meanwhile, on Monday, July 31st, Lapid said joining the Netanyahu government would ruin Israel rather than save it if his party was to join Likud.